what we're really focused on at the end of the day is how we create better customer journeys, right? How do we enhance that experience? Because if you're monetizing an experience just to monetize an experience, like ultimately you're going to fail, because it doesn't add value. It doesn't add value for the shopper, for the traveler, for the consumer. And so if you can keep that focus, and then you can start to layer on again the efficiencies of the systems that have been built over the years. Um, you start to create magic, right? You start to create some really special things.
Eric Brackmann is VP of Commerce Media at Koddi, and we've tried, I'm going to say 3 times now to connect and have this conversation. So I'm glad we finally did. Eric, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
So for context, can you tell us, first of all, tell us about Koddi, the brief description of the company's place in that market space, and then maybe your role there.
Yeah, for sure. So Eric Brackmann, VP of Commerce Media. I run our Commerce Media business unit, and Koddi is really focused on helping companies build and operate commerce media networks on one side of the business. So helping retailers, helping companies generally figure out how they're going to best monetize their first party data, their first party experiences, and really deliver for their consumers, for their travelers, for their shoppers, for their diners, as well as for their suppliers, for their advertisers, and folks that want to get into that ecosystem. We also have a demand side business, so we work with a lot of advertisers as well to buy billions of dollars of advertising across the digital media ecosystem. So heavily engaged in all parts of the ecosystem.
Retail media exploded maybe 2, 3 years ago. It became a thing. Everybody who's got any kind of a media budget all of a sudden started exploring it and then dumping money into it, just like flooding the whole space. But commerce media kind of grew out of that. I would say even more recently. I'd love to hear your views on, what was it? What were those things that kind of prompted the morph from or out of retail media into commerce media? I think it was inevitable, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's a ton of data out there around, how fast different digital trends have grown over the years. Right, there was a search trend, there was a social trend. The retail commerce media trend, to your point, has grown quite substantially over the last couple of years. To the point, I think there's research out there that it's 1 in 5, $1 in 6 spent digitally are now spent within a retail commerce media network. And to your point, even a couple of years ago, that was quite small, and so the rate of growth is quite impressive. To your point, also there is this evolution in the industry right now from retail media into commerce media, and I think there's a couple of things driving it. One, there's generally the idea that sort of anything and everything is a media network, right? As long as
Right.
you've got a
Right.
first party relationship and you've got first party data and you've got the ability to monetize that, you've got an opportunity. And so, like, one of the ways to think about it is data. So a lot of what made early retail media networks successful was their transaction data, right? They were retailers and they could see what people actually bought. And there's a ton of power in that. That's different than what people search for. It's different when what people look at on Facebook. It's what they actually bought, right? What they're doing with their wallet. And you can start to build on that in different ways, especially when you start to think about loyalty programs. Like the hospitality industry, for example, has very rich loyalty programs spanning decades on travelers. And you start to say, hey, what could we do with that in order to enrich experiences for travelers across the travel ecosystem? And so you're starting to see other folks in other industries wake up and say, hey, retail has done really well with their first party data and creating monetizable journeys. How do we do that too? Couple other things to look at there. Retail media was very focused on endemic brands, right? So you're an actual seller into that ecosystem. That was largely based on the idea that sponsored listings, sponsored products were an overwhelming majority of the revenue in the ecosystem. What we are starting to see is that expansion into non-endemic retailers, right? Sort of parallel products and services, non-endemic brands that are interesting to consumers of a particular particular trusted brand. Um, there's an expansion of ad inventory. At one point was very much concentrated on site, and how do you monetize the .com and app? We're now looking at how do you move off into offsite, non-owned and operated, into in-store, on-prem um, opportunities, and then measurement, I think, is the last piece of it for me. Measurement in the retail media ecosystem was very concentrated again on that transaction that was happening at the retailer's point of sale. Brands are starting to think about that more holistically because there's a number of different ways that you as a consumer can interact with a brand, and the nature of transactions evolve over time as well. So
You know,
I don't know. That gives you a couple of different angles to think about.
yeah. I'm sorry about what's going to happen to your afternoon schedule because we're just going to keep talking for a while. Yeah, but it strikes me, and I've thought about this for some time, but I'm glad I have you to ask this question too, is that, retail media networks, as you said, they were endemic. They were a much more direct connection between CPGs, brands, retailers, and consumers. It all went through kind of a fairly direct system, but in commerce media, it's a network approach, which seems to me to be exponentially more complicated in terms of initiating the relationships, managing them, because I don't think you can just kind of do this and say, we're going to plug you into our system, have a nice day. There are all kinds of levers and dials you're probably going to need to manage in order to kind of effectively, you know, uh, make that relationship efficient. So, as somebody who sits right in the center of commerce media, how is that managed? Because, if all you're familiar with is retail media and kind of the systems that have been built around that to support it and to enable it, commerce media is this amazing concept. It makes complete sense, but getting your head around the about operationalizing it is a mind blower. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the good news is we're not starting from scratch, right? There's a lot of good work that's been done within the retail media ecosystem to build up a lot of systems and platforms. There's a lot of good work that's been done in the larger programmatic digital ecosystem to drive efficiency and interoperability in some of these systems. And so you start to piece those things together, and you start to say, hey, what we're really focused on at the end of the day is how we create better customer journeys, right? How do we enhance that experience? Because if you're monetizing an experience just to monetize an experience, like ultimately you're going to fail, because it doesn't add value. It doesn't add value for the shopper, for the traveler, for the consumer. And so if you can keep that focus, and then you can start to layer on again the efficiencies of the systems that have been built over the years. Um, you start to create magic, right? You start to create some really special things. To your point, there's a web of interactions across consumers and brands, and you can using some of the new technologies that are out there from an AI perspective, from like a graph database perspective. There's different connections you can draw and different then experiences you can highlight um, as you
But
go. And
so
so
does Koddi actually, um, consult and advise on the nature of the relationships and what activities you're going to try and highlight and leverage, or does Koddi more fit over into a technology provider primarily role?
we are primarily a technology provider, and have a set of SaaS solutions that make it really easy for a brand to stand up and operate a commerce slash retail media network. That being said, we've got a ton of experienced operators in the business, who have had the privilege of standing up and optimizing and running some of the largest retail and commerce media networks in the world. So we've got a pretty sharp team that is able to help with those things, and that is inclusive of engineering, inclusive of strategy and operations, inclusive of ad operations. We've also got a very deep partnership bench of folks that we work with across the ecosystem to be able to bring something to life. The last thing I'll say is like we are very much also in the business of empowering our partners to operate these businesses in the long run. So one of the things that's a little bit different about Koddi versus some of our comp set is it's not just don't hand us the keys and walk away, right? We want to be an engaged partner and help build
Okay.
this over time.
A groundswell starts small, quietly building into something powerful, unstoppable. That's also how market momentum works. If you're launching a startup, introducing a new product, rebranding, or rolling out a new service or initiative, it's not enough to simply show up. You need to build momentum strategically. Specializing in go-to-market strategy, Groundswell works with organizations at every stage, creating custom plans that help products and brands break through the noise and grow, ensuring a launch that doesn't just happen, it sticks. From understanding your target audience to perfecting your positioning, Groundswell's approach ensures you're not just catching the market's attention, but keeping it. With expert guidance, your product moves from launch day to long-term success, turning that initial wave of excitement into sustained growth. If you're ready to take your product, service, or brand to market, it might be time to think about a Groundswell strategy. Visit groundswell.cc to learn more.
Having spoken to a number of people who are deeply involved in the space, they came from traditional digital media. One of the things that bubbled up through those conversations, and I've seen it a little bit in other media, is the kind of huge amounts of waste because of gatekeepers, because of click fraud, because of and so your $1 at the beginning of the funnel comes out looking more like a dime at the end of the funnel. And I know that was a real concern as retail media really started to explode programmatically. In this world, however, because it's exponentially more complex and it's a full ecosystem play of you're actually interweaving ecosystems. I would just say, do you see the same levels of waste? Do you see the potential for waste? What do you think companies or commerce media networks can do to mitigate some of that waste? Is it a fair question?
No, I think it is a fair question. I think there's a couple of things to consider within that frame. One, the commerce retail media ecosystem tends to be very efficient and very performant. And so when you talk about, are you wasting impressions? Not really within this ecosystem. Are you needlessly wasting resources when you start to think about, the environmental impact, the impact of having a bunch of servers running? It's a very efficient ecosystem on the whole. Now, there's a lot of support and operations and very smart people and technology underneath it, but in regards to the larger digital advertising agency, our ecosystem, it is quite efficient. Now, on the other side of the coin, buying it can sometimes be a little bit clunkier than I think we want it to be.
I can imagine.
A lot of the retail commerce media world today is not programmatically bought. It's bought on IOs. It's bought via spreadsheets. It's bought via emails and managed service. And so there's a lot of things in the larger digital ecosystem that are just efficient in ways that commerce and retail media haven't quite cracked. What I think is really exciting about this space is we've got an opportunity where we sit today and over the next couple of months and years is to really bring those two things together, right? How do we take the hyper relevancy and hyper efficiency of the retail commerce media ecosystem and the scale and buying efficiency of the larger programmatic ecosystem and put those two things together in a way that we truly get the best of both worlds? I think that's the real unlock for us as a larger advertising agency or agency ecosystem is to really to make that happen and make the system a little bit better as a result.
Do you think that that the rest of the commerce media world out there sees the same potential there? I mean, is that, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that's kind of a general goal for the industry, is to kind of bring a more programmatic, scalable approach to this? Or because you're in it day in, day out. I'm on the sidelines looking in from the outside.
So there are certainly pros and cons, and there are certainly folks who are on either side of that argument. I think there, if we're going to be fair, there is risk that if you bring a little more programmatic flavor to commerce retail media, that you might lose some of the thing that makes it great. But I think, on the other side of the coin, we're starting to reach the limits of what's possible without, more infrastructure and more standardization and more programmatic buying. So I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, it's going to have to happen, I would think.
It's just a matter of, how do you make sure that it stays good, it stays performant, it keeps the magic that has made it take off over the last couple of years. I think that's the secret. And I think that's what I'm super committed to.
So, great. You just created the next question, which is, what are some of the things that people in the space are going to have to do to keep the magic as it grows, as it becomes more sophisticated and layered?
It's a good question. Couple of things for me. One, again, is really keeping a focus on making sure you're driving the right end customer experiences. Right? If you keep that focus, that foundation, and you're actually trying to make sure you add value, with every click, with every interaction, that's an additive experience. That's got to be pillar number one. Number two, we've got to, as an industry, standardize a couple of things. This sort of there's been a proliferation of retail media networks over the last couple of years, and there's good and bad in that. Like, I love the idea that there's differentiation in those places, and we're unlocking value in places where there wasn't value before. But there's also some things that are different, not necessarily because there's value being driven, but just because they're different. And so, like, how do we find the things that are value creating versus the things that just need to be standardized? So some level of standardization, I think, is going to be needed there. And there's efforts underway that we at Koddi are contributing to from the IAB and standards organizations to be able to get there. I think number three is really the adoption of an RTB framework for retail media. There isn't one today. The IAB doesn't yet have guidance there, but really making sure that actually works and getting all of the major ecosystem players on board with the way that this should be bought and sold programmatically is probably the third pillar to make sure that it really works.
From where you stand, do you think, I mean, God bless the IAB, because I think they have an impossible job. I mean, I don't know, whoever's running it, I'm buying that person a beer. But, especially at this early stage of commerce media, I mean, people are staking out their ground because of their own beliefs and their own methods and their own ways of doing things. And it would seem to me that there's a lot of I resist using this analogy, but the phrase is like, it's still a bit of a Wild West out there, which means there are some cowboys out there and girls still bent on doing things their own way, regardless of what might be better for the industry. And we have no need to, call anybody out here, but, do you think that the industry overall is ready to commit to those kinds of standards and best practices?
I would say that the short answer is yes. And I think the normal argument there is that it's sort of it's differentiation and innovation or standardization.
Okay.
It's an or conversation. And honestly, I'm if you ever get the pleasure of working with me, one of the things you'll hear from me is about the tyranny of or, because I'm a big believer in that there's got to be a way within this industry to achieve differentiation, to achieve the right customer journeys, to achieve the right level of monetization, to achieve new levels of innovation in the space, and address some standardization.
Right.
It may be different segments of inventory, it may be different segments of audiences, it may be different segments of experiences. I don't know what it's going to look like, but there's got to. I'm a big believer in that. It's got to be an in order for us to move forward. So I don't know. Got to beat the tyranny of or.
There you go. Well, that's what we'll name this episode, beating the tyranny of or. Okay, so I think this was eMarketer, but I'm not quite sure. I just can't remember. But there was a list of 10 predictions for retail media, and I'm just going to extend that out into commerce media for 2024. And this being an audio medium, I need to ask for a response that's more than a shake or a wave of the head.
Fair enough.
But I'll just read through them, and you can tell me what you think. Short answer, long answer, doesn't matter. Item number 1, AI increases in importance, both generative and predictive.
Yeah, that continues to be number one for me. I think AI has got huge potential in the commerce retail media space. I mean, media generally, the world generally, but like in this industry specifically, you start to think about enhanced personalization, relevancy, predictive capabilities there. Operational efficiencies, I think, are going to be huge within this ecosystem. So the amount of person power that it takes to traffic and run a campaign, and have that campaign be good and meet its objectives. It's all getting dramatically more efficient. You're seeing it in creative. You're seeing it in the end user experiences. I have a somewhat bold prediction that someday search will dramatically change as AI comes about. Right, you think about the way that we today engage with a lot of retailers, a lot of brands, is you go to a website, you put in some keywords, you search for something, right, and a list of things comes back, and you maybe add some filters, but ultimately a lot of retail media today, again, being in the sponsored products category, is about how do I get to the top of that list.
Right.
I think in an AI world, there may not be a list, right? You may actually just show up at a retailer and they may know what you want because of everything they know about you and your purchase patterns. And here's the best set of products for you to just add to your basket and check out, add to your cart and check out. And so, is that maybe a little bit scary? If you run a search-based ecosystem today, maybe. But I don't know, for me, it brings about a whole host of new opportunities for monetization and new opportunities for better customer experiences.
Sure.
So, I don't know. I think that's, is that going to be a 2025 thing? Probably not. But if you told me by 2030 that we were all still searching for things when we went to buy something, I don't know that I'd believe you.
Interesting. I'd like to have coffee or beer with yourself and one or two other people that I've spoken with recently who have nuanced views, maybe slightly different on that same topic. But again, that's another conversation. Okay, next item. AI changes the way shoppers find products. Just addressed it. You're jumping ahead of me here.
Check.
3, more sensible investment in the in-store rollout. This, pertains more specifically to retail media. Let's see. 4, measurement, cracking the incrementality nut.
I mean, if you want to hit back on 3, the in-store piece of it, there is a sort of broader commerce media angle there where, you're seeing airlines starting to think about, what does an in-airport, what does a seat back experience look like? Hotel brands thinking about what does a lobby experience look like? Obviously, stores in store. So I think there's an angle there where we start to think about, hey, how do we blend some of the digital and physical world together? I think sensible investment is an interesting way to put that. We're in a little bit of a CapEx strained world right now. And so, do I think those digital out of home experiences are going to get really, really big in the next 6 to 12 months? Probably not, given the amount of investment it takes. Now, do I think the ROI is there, and do I think there's a ton of potential? 110%. And so, how do we find ways to reuse assets that are already in the world to fulfill some of these experiences? And so there are a lot of places where screens already exist in stores, in airports, in seat backs. And how do we start to use those in a slightly better way, right? A better experience, better monetized, more personalized. But I don't know that we're going to see a proliferation of a whole bunch of new screens in the world in the next year.
Okay. We did touch on it a little bit earlier, but number 4 here, measurement, cracking the incrementality nut.
Yeah, incrementality is an interesting one. So, it's a big question in the space right now of, can you prove incremental revenue as a part of a commerce retail media campaign? And origins of the industry were definitely in the shopper marketing dollars, where incrementality wasn't really something that the industry was concerned about.
Right.
Now, more broadly, people care about that from a digital advertising perspective, and so it is a question that's coming up as the budgets get bigger and as you start to tackle larger brand and national budgets as part of retail media campaigns. I think like the good news is generally the partners we work with and the technology that we've got in place to measure that on an ongoing basis, it looks pretty good. Like the results are quite positive, and I say that not just from a retail perspective, but across the ecosystem. Incrementality is strong. Now the reality is you got to be able to prove that, you got to be able to report on it repeatedly, and you got to it has to stay true over time. Another thing you'll hear working with me is that the average is mean, but the variance is meaner. And so part of making incrementality work is that there can't be a ton of variance in it, right? It's actually got to be consistently good in order to continue to justify the investment.
Retailers become media companies. It's already happened. I feel like that's a bit of a gimme.
Yeah, it is definitely a gimme. It's actually one of the funnest things about this industry for me, though, is companies largely are starting to monetize in ways that maybe aren't necessarily the thing that you think that they do, right? When you think of some of these household brands, like, oh, I think Amazon's a prime example of this, right? You think Amazon is a retailer, right? But then you go look at their 10K and look at the dissection of their profitability and the way that they actually make money, and it's like, oh well, Amazon's actually a media company, right?
Right. Yep.
And so that is true of a lot of companies in the retail space. And then you start to take that outside the retail space. That's becoming truer and truer every day. And the fun thing for me is you start to talk about the broader commerce trends, taking it outside of media, is that companies are starting to monetize in ways that are just not their core business. And so that starts to present all sorts of different and unique opportunities for partnership and monetization, and media, not media, within those ecosystems. So probably a whole nother episode that we can talk about.
It's a big one. It's a huge deal. I think you're right. We could, and that's its own episode for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you start to think about, are airlines really airlines, or are they, credit card companies and media companies?
Well, I forget the exact numbers, but United Airlines a couple years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, published the value of its loyalty program. It exceeded the value of its actual airline, quote unquote, operations.
Correct. Yeah.
By a huge factor too.
Yes. And so, again, is that airline running a loyalty business with a credit card and a media business, or are they an airline? And it's like, well, maybe both. It's, I don't know, it's interesting to see the way the world has evolved, and things you wouldn't have thought possible 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Well, I think, and that kind of leads into this next question. The land grab fuels a talent race.
Yeah, that's a fun one. The industry is certainly expanding within commerce retail media, and so much so that there's not ton of people who know how to do this really, really well. And so, that's where there's certainly about a battle for talent right now within this ecosystem. Um, there's a couple of fun things that are happening. One, you're starting to see actual like commerce and retail media programs pop up at a lot of elite institutions. Um, which I think if you had told me that was going to be a thing 5 years ago, I would have called you crazy. But
Yeah, never saw it coming.
never saw you can like now get a degree in retail media.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, let's go. And so like, the larger industry and is moving towards filling that gap. Um, and I think the other fun thing is you're starting to see a lot of again folks from the programmatic space, so especially in some of the agency worlds, sort of get retrained into these ecosystems. And so for me, that's exciting because it brings a whole bunch of new ideas and new opportunity as well.
I mean, along those lines, and I think it goes back to one of the earlier points we were making, is that um, traditional programmatic digital media has a kind of well-established workforce structure. You kind of
Mhm.
knew what you needed to have in place, personnel-wise, talent-wise, to pull this
Yep.
off. Um, and retail media came along and kind of shook that tree a little bit, and now we need it to look like this. But in commerce media, it looks like that plus an awful lot more. I mean, you need, at least at this phase of the game, a lot of boots on the ground to manage those relationships. That's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. So I think that again, that's what's fun is like you're getting more and more people into this ecosystem, more and more people understanding it, more and more people building competencies. And so, I mean, the other big thing, actually, Cody's going to be announcing here pretty quickly is our commerce media certification program. And so we're building out a full-fledged sort of ecosystem of courses specifically around how to operate in the commerce media ecosystem as operators, as buyers, as sellers, as technologists, and it's sort of content from our collective experience in this space. That goes back. You made the point earlier. It's been a couple of years. Some of the old guys here have been in for a couple of decades, but you know, building all of that, putting all of that experience together, and making it freely available to anyone who wants to get certified.
Oh,
Uh,
that's wild.
yeah, so we're super pumped about that. Bunch of stuff that's coming out. It's something that we as operators in this space kind of saw as a gap. It's like, hey, there isn't anyone to the point earlier. There's universities that are starting to build programs around these things, but for folks that are out in the world, out in the workforce, how do we reorient them around some of the new paradigms? And so I don't know, it's an investment we've been making recently to be able to put together a whole bunch of content to be able to do that.
Wow. To I'm going to take a careful dog leg here, but I my experience with elite universities or any universities that are teaching new business technologies and paradigms that no matter how good they are, they're still behind the curve of actual commerce. I mean, where, Cody's developing the curve and other people are teaching about it. So I would say this is my own lame plug for saying, if you're going to look for some place to learn about this space, go to the people who are developing it, namely Koddi.
There you go. Shameless plug, academy.cody.com. Go check it out.
Right? When is it going to be available?
Uh, Unofficially, you can start taking courses today. Officially, it goes live next week, I believe.
Wow, that's a really big deal. That's huge. Well,
Yeah.
you heard it here, semi first. Well, Eric, thanks a million for this. I mean, I've said it a bunch of times already in this conversation, but there's so many different directions we could go, and I think the audience for this podcast and the readership we have on Customerland need to know this. They're anxious and excited to know what you're doing and your counterparts out there in this space. So, you know, I'm going to work hard to get back on your schedule at some point.
Yeah. I think we've got a couple of things we can talk about. Super excited.
Lots going on here. Well, Eric Brackmann is VP of Commerce Media at Koddi, and just officially, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.